I'm a journalist, in the sense of someone who writes a journal. In Essentialism, McKeown wrote, "The best journalists listen for what others do not hear. They read between the lines. But to read between those lines, the thoughts first need to make it onto the page. And it's easy to get lost in the weeds. But I found that a few simple practices help me extract the most value from my writing. And maybe they'll be helpful to you too. So here's how I journal to clear and focus my mind. Why I journal. So I recently read Alex Garland's The Beach, which you may know from the movie starring Leonardo DiCaprio. And in the book, Richard says, "I don't keep a travel diary. I did keep a travel diary once, and it was a big mistake. All I remember of that trip is what I bothered to write down. Everything else slipped away, as though my mind felt jilted by my reliance on pen and paper." I have the opposite experience. When I look back at the years that I didn't journal, it's all a blur. I broadly know where I was and what I did, but I can't recall many details. Journaling is like preserving your memories and thoughts in Technicolor, instead of letting them fade into a grainy black and white movie with lots of missing pieces. I realized this when I found a journal that I kept when I was 16, which I had completely forgotten about. It was fascinating to read what was on my mind back then. What stood out to me was how rich my inner world was. Sure, some of it was cringy to my adult self, but it also provided a clear snapshot of my past. And it's a phase of my life that shaped me into the man I am today. Intent. Journaling is a tool of self-discovery. You wouldn't use a screwdriver to drive nails into the wall. You would use a hammer for that. And it's the same with journaling. It helps to be intentional and know why you're journaling to get the most out of it. In the past, I'd just jot down what happened that day or get caught up in a negative thought spiral. That's why I eventually stopped journaling. I felt like it wasn't helping me and was just a waste of my time. But now I take a different approach. In Plato's Apology, Socrates says that the unexamined life is not worth living. So how do we live a life that's worth living? By getting to know ourselves, by examining the life that we're living as we're living it. When I journal now, I do so with intent. I journal to slow down life instead of letting it pass me by, to understand myself and the world better, to explore concepts and ideas, and ultimately to live a richer life. I still write down the things I did, but I now reflect more on interesting things I've seen or read and thoughts that I've had. And I explore where it all takes me. I choose to, as Robert Frost wrote, take the road less traveled. At least less traveled by me. Capture. I don't know about you, but I tend to have my most original thoughts when I'm not actively trying to have them. That's why I keep an inbox note in Apple Notes, where I can quickly jot down anything interesting I see or think of during the day. It allows me to quickly capture those. I used to journal with pen and paper and filled up tons of notebooks. I like being away from a screen, and writing by hand slowed me down, letting me think more deeply. But as I added more notebooks, it got harder to search through them, and there was no backup if I lost one. A few years ago, I switched to the app Day One, and I love it. I can easily organize my notes, keeping reflections separate from everyday thoughts. I can search my entries and access them anywhere. And I can add photos, videos, and audio notes to bring the memories to life. It is especially helpful when I want to capture experiences or reflections in more than just words. And it doesn't preclude me from writing on paper, because Day One lets me scan my journal entries with the Scan to PDF feature. There's also a scan text feature, which works great for block letters, but not so much for my handwriting. In all fairness, it's hard to decipher. Even I have trouble reading it sometimes. What I write. Journaling is a lot like tending to a garden. At first, you're just getting the basics down and you're focusing on the surface level details. But as time goes on and you nurture it, you start to feel more connected and comfortable. That's when you can dig a bit deeper, planting seeds of personal thoughts and being more intentional with what you share. The intention with which I journal gives me focus. I don't just start and ramble on. A typical entry has 3 segments. What I've been up to. I don't try to spend too much time on this, just enough to capture the feel of the day. I like adding a few photos, a video, or even an audio clip to provide more context. Commonplace items. These can be quotes or lessons from media I consume, as well as random thoughts or ideas I have. Basically, it's a catch-all repository for things I find interesting. The bulk of my entries focuses on exploration, reflecting on what caught my attention and why, exploring my inner world and following my curiosity. But that's only a loose structure. If there's something on my mind that I want to dive deep into, I'll just focus on that. I won't force myself to write about my daily activities. By the way, if you're new to journaling and you don't really know what to write about, prompts can be really helpful. I've created a list of 100 journaling prompts that you can download for free by clicking the link in the description below. Okay, so have you ever heard someone say that if you find something boring, you're just not asking the right questions? I find the same applies to life. We can get so caught up in the daily grind, along with our annoyances and worries, that life can start to feel flat. Journaling is an opportunity to snap out of that and go deep. We can look at a bird and say, "That's a bird," thinking we know it just because we labeled it. But do we? A baby doesn't know what anything is yet. It doesn't have the words to label what it sees or the context to understand it. To a baby, a plant is not a plant. It's just a texture, colors, and a smell. It's a sort of whole universe in itself. But we tend to lose that curiosity as we grow older and feel burdened by life's responsibilities. We think, "I don't have time to be curious. Bills need to be paid." Journaling is a way to reintroduce some of that curiosity into your life. It's a bit like going out into nature with a loupe, which is something that author Jenny Odell does.
I was recently given something that I would describe as something where you're never bored. And it's a jeweler's loupe. You could look at anything. You could look at like this tissue or I don't know, like anything like, moss, obviously, but also like rocks or your blinds. It is just endlessly fascinating. Like it's not going to be what you think. And it has this sort of element of surprise that I think we're all very addicted to, right? Which is like, you have to get really close to something with the loupe. And then all of a sudden it like pops into focus. And it's like this plant that you thought was smooth is like really hairy or something, And I remember when he gave it to me, I was like, I'll never be bored again.
Okay, so that's a broad idea of how I journal. Now let me give you 2 real-world examples of what I journal about. Example 1. The other day, I was going through old photo albums. When I saw pictures of myself at age 1 or 2, I felt a lot of affection. But when I flipped through the pages and saw myself at age 11 or 12, I felt something very different. It feels strange to even say it out loud. I'm almost embarrassed to admit it, but I felt contempt. At that age, I was bullied and didn't really have friends. I resented my younger self for not standing up for himself more, even if that meant getting into trouble or getting into a fight. Realizing that, I became upset with my current self. I don't want to feel that way about my younger self. I want to have self-compassion. That younger version of myself did its best to navigate those difficult circumstances, and those experiences shaped me into the person I am today. So I decided to have a chat with my younger self. I made a cup of tea, I pulled up a photo of when I was about 12 years old, and I looked my younger self deep in the eyes. And then I asked, "What would you like to talk about? Is there something you want to tell me?" It honestly was a healing experience. Afterward, I journaled about it and explored in more detail why I felt this way about myself, what I learned from the conversation, and how I can be kinder to myself going forward. Example 2. In the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, there's a wooden statue of a Luohan. A Luohan, I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, is one of the 18 original followers of Gautama Buddha. The idea is that they've reached enlightenment but stay on Earth to protect the Buddhist faith. They're hermits and supposedly have supernatural powers. What I found remarkable about this statue was its eyes. When I moved myself a little bit to the side and lifted up on my toes, I could look the Luohan straight in the eye. It was freaky. It was as if he was seeing straight through me with that stern look, soul to soul, no small talk. I was all alone in the room, so I kept looking. After about a minute or so, I felt like he could come alive at any moment, get up and walk out, or slap me in the face. I used this experience as a journaling prompt. What if he did come alive? What conversation would we have? What do I think he would ask me? What would I want him to ask me? And what would I ask him? Organize. After I finish writing, I add titles to my entry. A typical entry will have a life update section and a commonplace section, which I usually just label random thoughts. Other titles depend on what I journaled about. And this is often the most interesting part of my entry, and the titles vary from entry to entry. Review. The real magic happens when I review my journal entries, which I do about once a quarter. I review my older journal entries for a number of reasons. It gives me perspective. I can feel strongly about something in the moment, but I find that oftentimes things will just work themselves out with time. Or I'm more sympathetic to seeing it from the other side once I have more distance. It also helps me spot patterns. Having a helicopter view allows me to notice themes or identify patterns in my thinking or behavior. It shows me that big issues often start small. For example, a health challenge may arise after I've ignored the signals of my body telling me to slow down. And it forces me to ask the question, what needs change? When I find that I've been journaling about the same thing for months, that might be a sign that I either need to do something about it or let it go. The beauty of this process is that the insights I gain from this review influence how I perceive the world in the future, and they also shape my upcoming journal entries. It's a closed loop. Entry, review, and so on. A while back, I read an interview with a theologian in the newspaper. He talked about finding new insights when rereading the same text in the Bible. He said, "I'm a professional treasure hunter. Scripture is intended as a book that can come to life in every new context. What you experience determines which questions you come up with and what you pay attention to." That's kind of how I feel when I review my earlier journal entries. I can pick up on different things when reviewing my earlier entries based on what's going on in my life right now. It's also a goldmine for video ideas. Often the seed idea for a video or the examples that illustrate a bigger point I'm trying to make come from my journal. Maybe you're listening to all of this and feeling a bit overwhelmed. You thought about journaling, but you don't know how to get started or how to stick with it. If that's you, don't worry, I've been there. And I've created a simple guide on how to journal for beginners, which you can check out by clicking right here. So thanks for watching. I hope this video was helpful, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.